Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, America. Welcome to episode 55. We're still going strong. I hope you guys are enjoying the content, and I appreciate you guys for listening. All right, today we may get a little bit controversial. We shall see. I watch local news in the morning, and a topic that I see all the time is starting to press on me a little bit. I reject collectivist excuses that puts the blame on tools or systems instead of individuals who choose to do crime, who choose to do wrong, who choose to do violence, etc. And I'm doing some air finger quotes here. Gun violence is a favored slogan amongst the politicians and activists and corporate media. They like to use to sidestep accountability, to misdirect. So I want to talk about it head on because the stakes are pretty high. The stakes are innocent human lives being lost. Yeah, in major cities, Atlanta, Chicago, etc., for sure, but it's spreading out also to the suburbs and even more rural places. It's spreading out. As these populations in the city, it ain't that the populations are necessarily exploding in the city, but if a new, especially tech industry, moves in and gentrification, let's talk about that just for a sec. That's not what I want to talk about. I'm getting sidetracked, but I'm not opposed to gentrification as it's so called. There's nothing wrong with bringing the property value up and making an area nicer, but it does displace people. And those displaced people have to go somewhere. And if a place where low-income housing existed, or just old housing, not necessarily low-income, whatever, just a place that's getting a little dilapidated and whatnot, and somebody comes in and buys up 5 square city blocks to build high-rises and office buildings, those people got to go somewhere. So that pushes out to the outskirts, right? It used to be there in Atlanta. There's OTP and ITP, and everybody ITP rips on everybody OTP. That's outside the perimeter and inside the perimeter. But 285 used to be, when I was younger, 285 was like the outskirts for sure. Now 285 barely contains the population of Metro Atlanta. And just going outside of 285 these days, you got to go 6 exits down before you start to get a little elbow room. So yeah, I'm not saying population rise is a problem. It's not. I believe that's a false argument there. But anyway, my point is crime. We'll hit some statistics in a minute. So anyway, back to gun violence. And every time, imagine, folks, every time you hear me say gun violence, that I'm doing air finger quotes, because I reject the term gun violence. They coin activists, leftist activists and politicians, they coined that phrase, gun violence, as a deliberate deflection device. Yeah, in order to shift blame off of individual criminals and to shift blame onto firearms. They've been trying to control guns ever since the beginning. And I mean the beginning of our almost 250-year-old country. Unarmed citizens are easier to control. Unarmed populations are easier to control. That's just it. If you break it down to the barest essentials, that's it. But the leftists, who are big government, they want government control of everything. That's it. Gun violence makes guns seem really scary. Therefore, we must control them. Guns, good people, are inanimate objects. Yep, no different than your car, no different than your shovel, no different than the cup of coffee, the cup you pour your coffee in. There's a few. Every town, I think it was called Every Town USA or something like that. Every Town for gun safety and Moms Demand Action. People like that. They made the term gun violence widespread. If you say a thing enough, right? That's a tactic. You say a thing enough, it catches on. They made that popular in the very early 2000s and 2010s. And instead of a neutral description of a firearm-related incident, it became gun violence. Yeah, so everybody, yeah, that's it. And that turned into a political weapon that somehow implies that a gun possesses some kind of agency, some kind of ability to influence, that guns are somehow inherently evil and guns somehow cause the violence. Guns are inert tools. Again, like your car, like a knife, like a hammer, like a needle. All those things are used to kill all the time. Nobody says hammer violence. Nobody says automobile violence. Okay. Why not? No one even says knife violence. When some psycho goes on a rampage, especially in you see this in China and you see it in Great Britain, where dudes go on these knife rampages because guns, generally speaking, are outlawed by to the general population. Now, granted, organized criminals certainly have guns, but they go on these stabbing sprees, cutting people up. Nobody says knife violence, so it's kind of weird. The term gun violence, when they wrap up their statistics nicely to be able to shape a narrative, that lumps in suicides, which suicides are responsible for over half of gun deaths, gun-caused, gun-related deaths. Yeah. They lump in accidents. I reject the term accident. Negligent discharges. They lump those in as gun violence when some dumbass accidentally shot someone else because I thought it was unloaded. Meh. Defensive gun use. They lump in with gun violence. And yeah, there was a violent thing happening, but I think statistics are going to begin to show as people start paying attention to it and start actually recording these things, that defensive gun use is exponentially greater than what you think it is, and has been known to stop criminals and mass shooters and all sorts of things. And then criminal homicides, yeah, then they lump all those together, and it comes out with a big scary number, a big scary statistic. And then based on that big scary statistic, these leftist anti-gun groups demand that we disarm all law-abiding citizens. Because again, mind you, criminals aren't going to disarm just because the law says so. By definition, they're criminals. But what this term gun violence also does is it ignores root causes of violence. Yeah. And it purposely does that so that it can then purposely pave the way for more government control. And government control and government policies never, ever, ever touch the root causes of violence. They just put what they think are good Band-Aids onto a gushing bleed. Guns are not the problem. Guns have never been the problem. Just because guns happen to be an efficient killing tool, I agree, they are. And in some of my classes, sometimes I even call them the killing machine. Guns are meant for killing. Yeah. And I believe everybody should have one and carry one. Everybody who's mentally stable and not criminal oriented. So the term gun violence, it's misleading because it breaks it down into a little subset, but they don't address anything other than the gun. In the major metros, right, Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, places like that, Detroit, criminals use guns, but as far as violent crimes go, that I don't even think guns are most prevalent in violent crimes. If you just look at violence, but the media fixates on them. Because guns make headlines. That's why. They're scary. So it's easy to sensationalize, and it heats up political extremes on either side of the issue. Knives, blunt hammers, blunt objects, ball bats, and bare hands, account for thousands of assaults and murders every year. But nobody says a damn word about it. And mind you, I'm not saying we should place restrictions on knives and hammers. How are you going to restrict somebody's bare hands? It's the violence. It's not the tool used for the violence. It's the violence itself. Now, looking at some FBI data, we're not going to get into boring statistics yet, but we are going to get into some statistics. But some FBI data shows that most urban homicides are gang-related, drug-related, or some kind of personal beef over turf or some crap like that. And that they're not random shootings at all. And that's the vast majority of homicides. In higher crime areas, somebody with a gun, that's going to escalate. Right? If it starts out as a fist fight and one of the two has a gun, strong chance they're going to pull that gun and end that fist fight. But the fist fight started for some other reason, didn't it? Or you think somebody carrying a gun goes around and the gun's like, hey, let's go mess with this guy and then blast him. Maybe. There's some criminally insane people out there. Maybe somebody out there, their gun talks to them. I don't know. The violence comes from a broken culture. You can't outlaw human nature, good people. There's human nature, but then what else? Behavior, violence. That's a learned behavior, violence is. And it gets burned into the heart and mind by repetition, by the world around you. If you live in the hood and all you see is violence, that's what you know. And then it becomes your behavior, and you act that way. Violent, indignant. And unless you've got a criminal record, and if you have a clean record, you can go buy a gun. And I'm all for it. If you got a clean record, you should be able to buy a gun. But the gun's just a tool, still. And when these leftists and these activist judges and all these people, they focus only on the gun, and they let the perpetrator off the hook and then all the citizens around this perpetrator are now, there they are. We've got this problem child who grew up being violent, never got any accountability applied, no consequences, minimal consequences. Now he's still terrorizing the neighborhood, terrorizing the city. And furthermore, you're trying to disarm law-abiding citizens. Now they're left defenseless while criminals have the weapons. And they don't want to speak out, especially in the hood, right? Because they're torn between loyalty to their people, and they don't want to talk to cops. And if they did, they would be targeted anyway, most likely. So you're torn between, okay, do I speak out? Do I point fingers and name names? Or do I just sit quietly and maybe become a victim sooner or later? That's a tough choice. It's a tough choice. So let's do a broad look at gun ownership versus crime. Now, I'm not going to belabor these too much, but these figures bust the leftist talking points. But they say them enough, right? That's the thing. If we say it enough, it must be true. But it's not true. States with higher gun ownership have lower crime. So the 2024-25 FBI data, one, overall violent crime in America is down significantly over the past 5 years. So, one, everybody should acknowledge that and look at that and acknowledge it. The only reason it seems like the world is out of control is because social media, because people love to catch it on video and post it up, and it gets a million hits. But crime is down. Violent crime is down. And now these states are rural, right? But we got Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, Idaho, all with, nearly 70% gun ownership. And their crime stats are extremely low. And also in the South, you've got a lot of, because most southern states are gun friendly. But look at states that are not gun friendly. Massachusetts, New Jersey. They've got extremely strict gun laws, but somehow their crime rates are through the roof. So I said crime's down. Atlanta, specifically, I'm going to talk a lot about Georgia and Atlanta because that's where I'm at. But the homicides dropped. I think in 2024, there was 120 something recorded homicides. Now, aggravated assaults went up. And if you know anything about Atlanta, you live in Atlanta, you got all these young people out running the streets creating freaking chaos everywhere. And that lends itself to that aggravated assault number going up. But most of those are not gun related in any way. But what does that prove, though? That the people are the problem, not the gun. And even in these states that have lower crime rate, like homicide rates, it's the urban spaces that push those numbers, folks. It's the urban spaces that push those numbers. I'm going to say it right now before we get into what we got coming next, but correlation does not equal causation. Everybody, we got that right. But I would consider myself a street smart guy. I grew up on the low end, and I have a fair amount of experience with violence. I was never a gangbanger or anything like that, but I'm adjacent. I was always adjacent. I was hood adjacent, gangbanger adjacent, and intimately familiar with violence throughout my youth. So from what I see, and then I see data that backs it up. It's lawful gun owners do not push the crime waves. Criminals do. Lawful gun owners do not do crime, generally speaking, in numbers, right? Of course, there's always anomalies here and there. Some jealous husband does a murder-suicide or something. I get it. But that does not barely registers as a decimal blip on the crime statistics. Criminals ignore every law in the books. You can ban guns all day long. They're going to have them. Yeah. You look at the war on drugs. All right. Now we're going to get into some boring statistics, but I'm going to use these statistics to set up where I'm going next. And if you want to hit me up about racism and this and that and the other, you're welcome to it. I will discuss it with you all day long. But the facts are the facts. And here we go. Now I'm going to be working on Metro Atlanta statistics. And Metro Atlanta is, a couple of counties here in the middle, Fulton County and North Fulton. I don't know if, I think they might be considered. Let me see. I thought I had that. Metro Atlanta at any rate. And I'm going to tell you. And then we're going to work on some Georgia state statistics. But Metro Atlanta area encompasses somewhere around 6.5 million people. And that's a lot of people. Now, you guys know, if you've ever been to some major cities, Metro Atlanta spreads out. Atlanta's the city in the trees, right? Or something like that. I forget what people call it. It's not as compact as some place like New York, for instance, or Boston or something like that. Yeah, Atlanta spreads out a little bit. And it's good. I like it. I like the green trees. 6.5 million people. And of that, 45% are white, about 35% are black, somewhere around 10 to 12% Hispanic, and then somewhere around 6 or 7% are Asian. Now, some of those numbers vary depending on what source you look at, because we have a significant amount of undocumented citizens cruising around Metro Atlanta. In the city statistics, Atlanta is about 47% black and about 39% white, and then others. Now, I'm not minimizing the others, good people. Don't get wrong here. But for the sake of what we're talking about, we're talking about black and white right now, because the majority of the crime statistics shake out like that. All right, in the state of Georgia, so Atlanta's majority black, or I guess you'd say the plurality, 47% black. In Georgia, that's not the case. There's a lot of rural space in Georgia, and it's something around 60% white, 35% black, and then others. So white versus non-white categories is how GBI breaks it down for whatever reason. Because the numbers are largely black, takes up the non-white category. 2024, these are the latest data. 83% of murders were committed by blacks. This is GBI statistics. 81% of robberies committed by blacks. 66% of aggravated assaults committed by blacks. Now, I've got a very interesting statistic here. And you think I'm being racist. I'm just pointing out factual numbers right now. We'll get to all the whys and what fors. 53% of rapes were committed by whites. Now you know what? And I'm even tempted, I'm apt to do a podcast on this topic later. That was an interesting statistic that stood out to me while doing this gun violence situation here. 53% of rapes were committed by whites. That more to follow. All right, that was violent crime. Property crime. The disparity is a little less, right? The disparity is a little less in property crime. But the overall violent crime statistics shake out. 67% of all violent crimes committed by blacks. The overall property crime, we're talking burglary, larceny, motor theft, 52% shake out to be black. And then, obviously, overwhelmingly males, right? And overwhelmingly between the ages of 18 and 34. Overwhelmingly. And that's across demographics. Atlanta-specific homicide victims. Now, look, this is a very important number. The victim demographics, 2024 Atlanta Police Department data. 90% of homicide victims were black. 87% male. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And then 93% of the suspects that arrested for those were black. Like something like out of 100 plus, like 7 of them were female, maybe. So between 91 and 97. So that's 22 and 23 data. They don't have this data newer than that. 91 to 97% of known fatal shooting victims and suspects were black. Yeah, victims and suspects. Victim and suspects between 88 and 96% male. And then the averages, surprisingly, the average ages was between 26 and 31. So yeah, there's a lot of 18 upward who were out doing crime, but the victims and perpetrators of murder were, the average age was 26 to 31. So all right, I'll hit a few more. Come on, a few more. I hate to keep doing statistics. So black individuals were victims of violent crime 1.9 times higher than their population share. And they were arrested for violent crime 2 times higher than their population share. Blacks are victimized, largely by other blacks, 3.2 times higher than a white rate of victimization. And the arrest rate is 3.8 times higher than the white arrest rate. And overall, this is the takeaway number. And I'm talking to the black community here. 82% of violent crime victims were the same race as the offender. That's the thing to think about. And I'm not saying it's okay to do crime on the other race or anything like that. I'm saying it's just crazy that the vast majority of the violence perpetrated by young black men is perpetrated on young black men. That's a shame, and we'll get to it here. Because, look, that was crime statistics, all right? That was some just dry numbers. You can take them for what you want. Dry numbers. But now we're going to look at root causes of violence, folks, and you ain't going to like it. Probably the black community is not going to like what I'm about to say. And I welcome debate. In metro Atlanta, well, urban areas for sure where there's majority black population, but I'm talking about metro Atlanta. All the crime, not just a violent crime, hell, all the crime, it stems from the same toxic culture that's being pushed day in and day out. And it has been purposely crafted over the past 6 or 7 decades by the political activist frickin', and you can call them puppet masters if you want. And it's celebrated via ignorance, either from lack of education or just willful ignorance. This toxic culture is celebrated. The culture of fatherless homes, the purposeful cultural division, because the left loves class warfare, good people. They love it. So they have a vested interest in maintaining a significant cultural divide. Welfare dependency. The devaluation, right, of moral behavior. Morals in general. Manners in general. Good manners are no longer applauded or rewarded. This is a part of this toxic culture. And I'm open for debate. Over 70% of black children are born to single mothers. That's bad. But largely that's based on, well, definitely poverty, school dropout rates, gang involvement, which is probably a pretty significant one, and then violent crime related to that gang involvement. And like I said, virtue in general is laughed at. Good manners is laughed at. If you're a young black kid and you try to speak as though you are somewhat educated and you enunciate words correctly, you get clowned on. Virtue is laughed at. Education even is laughed at. Self-reliance gets, this welfare state degrades at a family's self-reliance. And then in this ghetto culture, self-reliance is thieving. You know what I mean? That's what's considered self-reliance. I got to get mine, so I'm going to take yours. That's what the ghetto culture celebrates, exacerbates. And even centuries ago, I always bring up Frederick Bastiat, but he talked about the welfare state is the actual is the opposite of virtuous self-reliance. Ghetto and gangster culture glorifies predators. Yeah. Now I remember, now look, I'm no fan of Hillary Clinton. I can tell you that. But I remember in the 90s, she said something like, maybe she wasn't nuanced enough. I don't know, man. But she said like young black men are predators or something like that. Well, I mean, I don't know if she was like real. She got ripped for it though, and she was a Democrat. And the Democrats pride themselves in owning the black vote, and that wasn't a slip of the tongue there. They pride themselves in owning the black vote. But it does. Gangster culture absolutely glorifies predators because it's glorified in a way that it's, well, romanticized even a little bit, that, hey, the strongest survive. So you got to be the strongest, whether it's through violence or stealing or whatever it is. Well, I mean, it's not an outdated concept. The strong do survive, but being strong in mind and body, not just the ability to shoot somebody and take their stuff. And look, all right, I'll get to it. The war on drugs, good people. What did the war on drugs do to the black community? It was called a war on drugs, but it was the opposite of that. But what it did do is create a massive, widespread underground system of black markets, gang wars, turf wars. Meanwhile, the CIA is importing drugs from South America, but in the inner cities, they're the ones, they're paying the price on American soil. And the black population loses, in this dynamic, this underground system. Yeah, it's the way it is. I'm open for debate on it. Progressive policies, folks. These leftist and progressive policies, they bemoan and belittle and erode the nuclear family and make it a butt of jokes and clownery, and the nuclear family is the source of all evil. The nuclear family is the bedrock of goddamn civilized society. Now, that don't mean that there aren't bad individual humans out there. A dad who's running around banging a secretary, or a mom who's, hooked on Valium. Yeah, I get it. There's individual issues to be dealt with, but we're talking about the structure itself. Mom, dad in the household, kids who have structure, kids who have a little discipline. It ain't got to be friggin' rigid, and kids who have a little bit of guidance. Yeah, a little guidance. Who are urged to get an education, who are urged to get the job, to learn a little bit of structure and discipline. There's more to it than just pro sports and whatnot, and raw athletic ability. The nuclear family was and it should still be the bedrock of civilized society. Now, if you're out there and you're listening, you're gay and trans and whatever, lesbian, hey, that the structure itself is intact. You still shouldn't be running around. If you got a partner, you still shouldn't be running around doing drugs and being promiscuous or whatever other vile things. The structure still holds. Whatever your little nuance is your little nuance, and that's great. Well, I'm about to get off on a different tangent. Let me back up here. Let's see. Yeah, when I was young. So anyway, growing up, right, I was an only child, unsupervised, and we always came up in the lower end. My mom and or dad, they divorced when I was very young, but they was always moving around, south side of Atlanta somewhere, chasing low rent, I guess. I grew up, my grandparents on my dad's side always lived in Section 8 housing. My uncles, look, my dad was rock solid, my Uncle David, rock solid. But some of my other family members, not so much. And they were always putting extra effort onto my grandparents. Anyway, they always lived in Section 8. So we were always among the one or two white families in a completely black neighborhood or something like that. But they always moved around from whatever apartment to apartment. I assume chasing low rent. Hell, I don't even know why. But what I did see throughout all that is, I saw welfare dependency. And I saw people who had no incentive to get up and go to work. And I saw a lack of marriage. I saw teen pregnancies. And when I was young in the 70s and 80s, I didn't see the victimhood narrative. That came along probably in the mid to late 90s and 2000s. I didn't really see the victimhood culture. But that blew up, man, and especially in the 2000s, that blew up, being pushed by leftists and the progressives of today. But today, what does that do? What does that enable? Yeah, these indignant tantrums you see out in public when a grown-ass woman gets questioned or gets called out for doing something that's just generally speaking unacceptable. And you get these friggin' violent, indignant tantrums, and that's unacceptable shit, man. And that, I didn't even see that kind of shit in the 70s and 80s or even in the 90s. But that stuff, those aren't symptoms of just poverty. I've known plenty of poor people who are perfectly sane, rational, well-behaved. They got up, did what they did, man. There's plenty of poor immigrants from all over the world that come here with a strong family unit, and they don't do any violence. The failure is not just the poverty piece, it's individual character and culture that is being purposely decayed by the activists. And you need to understand what I'm saying, people. The activists have a stake in it. They have a stake, and they are purposely decaying the culture to create the dependency on their system. All this shit is exacerbated by garbage, bullshit Marxist urban policies that have done nothing, folks. Have done nothing to help the black community. I used to watch one of my favorite shows when I was young, Good Times. And that was what, you look at it and you're like, well, yeah, they're poor. James is out there working. JJ catches an odd job here and there. Florida, did she work? She worked too. I think she worked at like a social worker thing. But guess who ran that household? Yeah. James didn't mess around. He didn't mess around. He was structured. He had discipline. Yeah. And guess what, man? They never got rich, but they were a family. They were happy. And they struggled, yeah, for sure. And I'm not saying that's the stasis, right? I'm not saying that's where I'm just saying. Minus the dad, that looks very different. Look, you go to any major urban area. I think in Good Times they were in Chicago, right? Yeah, I think so. Go to first of all these major urban cities, they're all Democrat run. And if you go to any one of these cities and look around and you see these homeless tent cities and people living under the bridges and all this stuff, you can point by point go back and find a failed progressive policy that created that. And a policy that most likely got funded and then somehow magically just petered out. But then, there's a few politicians that their net worth magically grew, in following months. After the hubbub went away, right? The policy got passed, it got funded, and then you see no movement. And then a year later, you got politicians who adding to their net worth. And let's get a little racial here for a minute. Don't think for 1 second that black politicians and black councilmen and black commissioners are immune to corruption, because they're not. No politician, no councilman, no commissioner is immune to corruption. It all depends on the foundation of their character. And the majority, I'm going to do finger quotes, white system is not blameless in all this at all. Again, I continually blame the leftists. And especially from a historic perspective. Folks, I am not dismissing, all the injustices of the past. I am not dismissing it. I'm not minimalizing it. It exists. It's there. And you can remember it. And you can have museums dedicated to it. And you can teach the history of it in schools. But don't dwell in it. Because the white, air fingers quote, white system has become the easy scapegoat to avoid individual accountability. Well, why do you say that, Edgar? Because I have real conversations with real people. I watch and listen to a vast, broad spectrum of perspectives, to include extremely racist black people. And it's a common theme within the deep black spaces that the white system is the evil, the big evil. The white people are the big evil. And that ain't the case either. All right. Now I'm going to do another set of statistics. First, I'm going to give you a quote. America's greatest crime against the black man was not slavery or lynching, but that he was taught to wear a mask of self-hate and self-doubt. Hold on to that. I'm going to repeat it. So here's some other statistics. In America today, well, as of 2024, statistics are slow to get out, folks. No, this is 2025 data, 2024, 2025 data. There are 2 million black American millionaires in America. 2 million. Now, I get those figures from Statista and UBS and the Credit Suisse Global Health Reports and all kind of other. They're compiled. 2 million black American millionaires. And that shakes out something like 1 in every 25 black adults. And that number has grown since 2020 even by probably 250,000 people. No, more than that. I think it says in 2020 there was somewhere around 260,000 black millionaires. And by 2025, 2 million black millionaires. Well, what drives that? What drove that? Some got their gains through the stock market. Yeah. Home ownership is a major factor in that stability and that being able to get equity and those kinds of things. Well, and clearly just being smart with money. Entrepreneurship. Yeah, entrepreneurship is a driver of that. And then there's 2 others that are obvious. What are they? Yeah, pro sports and entertainment. I don't know how many of those 2 million millionaires are pro athletes, but probably a significant number. And entertainers, for that matter. Yeah, that's significant. I'm not a millionaire. I perhaps, as of recently, and I mean the past couple of years, perhaps maybe know 1 millionaire. Maybe 2. And clearly we're not homies. We just know each other. All right, so now they're given that statistic, right? And that's about 5% of the black population. About 5% of the black population are millionaires. The median net worth for black households across America is $24,520. So I want to address that disparity here. How is that median net worth across America? And that's to include these millionaires, right? So this 5% of the that's the median number, folks. That means it goes lower than that, well lower. How is that possible? So when the leftist activists and the progressives talk about how the capitalism creates poverty, Well, I'll point you to the fact that, yeah, there are 5% of the black population millionaires. Capitalism, well, communism didn't get that done, I can tell you. And by looking at what we looked at for how they got there, we're looking at stock market and home ownership and entrepreneurship and sports and entertainment. That's capitalism at work right there. But why is there such a gap? If we're trying to bridge that gap, that's the middle class built America, good people. The middle class built America, physically built it. Why is there such a gap? And I quote, America's greatest crime against a black man was not slavery or lynching, but he was taught to wear a mask of self-hate and self-doubt. So if you're black, one, what do you think about that statement? Two, if you're black, how does it look with the black community, or is the black community helping the black community? So I point you to one of my favorite people to quote on the subject of race. And this is a man who didn't care for whites particularly, but what he did understand is accountability. And that was Malcolm X. That's who said that. He understood accountability. Yep. There's a crisis of accountability in America today. And part of it comes from these soft on crime leftist policies that just continue to linger. Part of it comes from these sort of activist judges and things like catch and release. When a violent repeat offender gets arrested and cycled through these major urban, like Fulton County, for instance, this socialist, and they got these social justice defenders and prosecutors and whatnot, and these judges who are social justice activists. A violent repeat offender can get arrested, spend the weekend in jail, wait for court on Monday or Tuesday. And this guy's probably got a rap sheet 3, 5, 8 pages long. Armed robbery, aggravated assault. And then he'll get a reduced or no bail release, catch maybe probation or some reduced charges down to some the word's escaping me right now. I'm not felony, misdemeanor. There we go. God dang. So that it doesn't look bad on his record. And then boom, kicked out into the street. And there's been and here's the thing now, because we got the internet and we got instant information. There's instances where dudes have gotten out of prison, gone out in the same day, and committed the exact same crime in the same day. Okay. Oh, man. And that's part of what you see on the right leaning, what do you call it, news media. And they'll bemoan that, right? Well, this guy shouldn't have ever been out on the street. He got released and then went out and murdered somebody, right? That's a legit thing. That's a legit problem. And that's not wrong for right-wing media to point that out. Left-wing media just glosses right on over that. Why is a violent repeat offender constantly out on the street? Why? It's not a human rights issue. Now, look, first, let's jump into another topic just for a moment. Criminal justice reform needs to happen. We need to relook at our criminal code. We need to look at nonviolent crime and reassess what things really warrant clogging up the system with. And then we need to relook at violent crime and determine, hey, does this human being need to be off the street? Some maybe indefinitely. And then we need to relook at jail itself. Right now, what is prison but a meat factory where they go in, learn to become more violent and more lethal? even if it's just in defending their own butthole, right? You're going to learn to either protect yourself or assimilate with some group that's willing to protect you for your allegiance or whatever. What kind of reform is happening in that environment? Zero reform is happening in that environment. So, yeah, there needs to be, and yeah, there's some little programs, man. I know there's little educational programs here and there, and you got some little nonprofit, preacher goes in and prays with the criminals and stuff. I get it. I understand there's things, but those things aren't working. Those things aren't working. So anyway, back to, yes, there needs to be some very serious and extreme criminal justice reform. That needs to be a priority. All right, meanwhile, back to the system as it is. Repeat offenders getting back out on the street days later with no serious bail at all. Well, overly high bail is just racist because they can't raise that money, so they're stuck in jail. Well, a criminal offender needs to be stuck in jail. A violent offender. A violent offender needs to be stuck in jail. Yeah, that's it, man. A violent offender needs to be stuck in jail. But even, especially in Fulton County, I mean, holy cow, it's liberal, right? Liberal, to say the least. But they prioritize like DEI even in the justice system. All right. They're going to do their own curtailing. Well, there's too many black people getting in trouble, so we're going to let these guys go. Well, I think violence is the metric there, not the color. Just like you getting ahead in business should be based on merit. Yeah, you going to jail should be based on merit. If you do something, if you hurt someone else, that warrants you going to jail. You merited that. It's crazy how these social justice people work. It's always Band-Aids and never the root cause. That's the problem. Now, in my opinion, my libertarian opinion, government exists only to protect individual rights. Therefore, to punish aggressors. If you are a violator of a non-aggression principle and you physically hurt or murder or even steal someone's property, you go to jail. That's it. And I don't know. Do you think I'm sounding racist? I hope not. I'm not. I'm certainly not. I'm looking up a thing right now, so bear with me. So this whole thing is not meant to be political, but understand I blame the left for a lot of failed policy, especially in urban areas, especially when it comes to welfare state stuff. And earlier when I said it was being crafted over the past 6 or 7 decades, yeah, LBJ, that's right. So anyway, but I'm not meaning for it to necessarily be political, but understand policies are what they are. And major urban cities are almost exclusively run by leftist Democrats. And that's where the problems are. Again, the government exists to protect individual rights and therefore punish aggressors. The recidivism rates for violent felons is somewhere in a neighborhood of 60+%. So that means you have a failure rate by letting these people go. Yeah, you have a failure rate. You have a success rate of 40%. That's a failing grade. You get a 40% in school on anything, you have failed. That's a big fat F. And if there's enough numbers there to actually get patterns and statistics, you got to, okay, we have to do something different. But the political doctrine doesn't say do something different. And letting these repeat offenders go, that's not compassion, good people. You're just setting them up for future failure. Sooner or later, violent, aggressive criminals are either gonna eventually do something so egregious that they go to jail, or they're gonna get smoked. Yeah, that's it. One or the other. They're going to die, live by the sword, die by the sword, blah, blah, blah. They're going to go out and get murdered in the commission of a crime or whatever, or a retaliatory crime, retaliatory crime, or they're going to end up, with life in prison or something. So it's not compassion to the criminals, and it's certainly not compassion. On the contrary, it's cruelty to the broader society, especially the victims of their crimes, because violent criminals always have a victim, right? That you can't stand by yourself and do violence without affecting someone else. Otherwise, it's not violence, it's just crazy, right? You're standing around. You can stand in the middle of a sidewalk and scream and yell, act violently, F this, F that. If you don't put your hands on anybody, you don't spit on anybody, you don't shoot anybody, stab anybody, then you don't have a victim. You basically just exercising First Amendment rights. So it's definitely, to be soft on crime is to be cruel on the victims. And then it's just unfair to the communities around them. Because now it can be a poor community. It can be the poorest of poor communities. But if there's no criminals, and then you got like the gangs, right? You got the one or two bad apples that they're like wild cards. You never know if they're going to start blasting or if they're going to steal something from your car or what. It's an inversion of our morals to reward crime and thugs and then try to disarm the citizens and producers. It's backwards. It's backwards. Endless second chances without consequences just creates career criminality. That's all it does. That's what your soft on crime policies does. Creates career criminals. Well, been talking a lot of junk, Edgar. You've been talking a lot of junk. Borderline racist. You're picking on black people. Just stating the facts. But I'm always down to offer some potential solutions. Yeah. Some solutions that I think may be, a little pragmatic. So at the community level, because that's where it all starts, on the midterm, right? Mid-range, right? You act at the community level. And for every criminal out there, for every thug, for every whatever, there's 10 solid, strong men with a good head on their shoulders and good moral values. Strong men in these crime-ridden neighborhoods, and I've seen a lot of this on the this is another reason the local news is so good, because you get a little glimpse into some of this stuff. Now, when I was young, this stuff wasn't really going on, but a group of dudes coming together, a group of fathers who take these young at-risk kids, these single kids who have single moms and whatnot, and they provide mentorship and skill building, right? Teacher, one of them I see, they're teaching kids how to like write resumes and tie ties and have good manners and be well received by the general public. You don't have to bend, folks. You don't have to lose your identity or culture. To be functional in society, even if you're a minority, even if you're in the minority group, wherever you're at, you don't have to give all that up. But there is a standard of behavior where nobody else should fear that you're going to snap and go violent, or where you don't escalate a disagreement. And these strong men can do that, and they have done that, and they're doing this in some places, but that's just a piece of it, man. Or you partner with your local churches, you know what I mean, to offer alternatives and little workshops or whatever to help rebuild the moral foundation. But it's got to be, I hate to say sold, you have to sell it, man. If you're a church preacher and you're preaching to this family, but they're not seeing any practical way to get out of, especially a little kid doing crime, right? He thinks this is the only way I can make money. This is the only way I can do it. You've got to show them alternative ways as well. But there needs to be that moral foundation. You need the values, man. And celebrate and glorify the family unit. Houses with a father and a mother, you should be the example, which means dad can't be out boozing and chasing women either, right? You gotta be a stand-up guy, which also means mom can't be out shaking her ass and running up credit cards or shoplifting from Lenox Mall either. You know what I mean? So build up the family unit, glorify the family unit as the right way, because it is the right way, and be there to guide and teach one another through everything, man, good and bad, through everything. Be there for each other, to include dad, especially dad, not baby daddy who's got, now that exists. I get it. There's dudes out there with 6, 7, 8 kids all over the place. That's bad, man. That's bad. It's bad for the kids. Dads, who knows, the guys who aren't being held accountable for that. I don't see how, I guess child support don't really seem to be a thing in the hood. I guess if the guy ain't got a job, he ain't got nothing to do. No, you can't squeeze blood out of a damn rock, right? Be there for each other, folks. And help each other through bad times, good money wise. Hell, I got the Help a Homie fund so I can help people just little, just to get those diapers, you know what I mean, or get some gas, get those brakes fixed. Be that person that helps out without expecting something in return. And that's just the moral piece of it. Now, what about crime, though? I mean, you can do your own neighborhood watch. Now, look, if you're going to be armed out there, you need to be trained out there. And a presence may deter predators, like proper predators, but it also may invite challenge too, especially if you're out there bullshitting, if you're not really doing what you're supposed to do. That probably needs to be coordinated with local police precincts. Yeah, for sure. But it's buy-in from the neighborhood. If all the neighborhood men are doing it, you know what I mean? But understand this, if you're going to be armed, you need to be trained, folks. Period. That's period. What else? So that crime, yeah, you might be, but we remember back in the, I can't remember when, 11 or 12, the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Well, George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch guy. And how'd that turn out? So yeah, don't take some stuff like that on without some serious consideration and planning and all that. But anyway, back to still voluntary stuff. What about voluntary sort of community educational or economic, like co-ops? You know what I mean? Have little neighborhood workshops that are free, or get somebody to donate their time, a professional or an entrepreneur to come out and devote a little time. You guys do workshops or help with life skills, even developing emotional intelligence. The topics are endless of what you can work on to become better individuals so that they can then become better communities. And then long term at the local level, I know it's tough, but hey, get off of government, man. Get off the government dependency. Nobody wants to give up free money, but look, that money ain't free. I don't care what you think. And then start looking, instead of government, look at private charities or look at churches and these NGOs that are nonprofits that have job training that are grounded in realistic skills, right? That it's something that's practical and real, where you can get a job making a decent living. Yeah, you got to get up and go to work to do it, but that builds other things, right? Character, keeps you active, gets you off the couch. And through these little local co-ops, look, you can do little cultural campaigns that kind of highlights the downside of the thug life and the gangster life and I don't want to say hip hop. I mean, there's good music out there, but like gangster rap stuff that shows that, like, look, this is just a fashion statement. If you carry on, the vast majority of you are going to end up dead, right? And so downplay that thug life and upplay taking individual responsibility for things. And even through sports, folks, that's what you see with the black communities a lot. Dudes will focus hard on basketball or focus hard on, and like whole groups, because everybody loves to play ball, right? You don't have to get, but then you might have some hard ass coach out there who's like really teaching you some life skills too. And that's great, man. Do that. But that can expand beyond sports and beyond music. It can. Now, look, I've seen neighborhoods sort of shift. I've seen combat veterans involved and stuff like that. And I've seen local pastors kind of turn, blocks around. I mean, just the act of getting up and having a clean yard. You may think that sounds petty, right? But if you clean your yard and your neighbor cleans their yard and everybody's got a nice looking yard, pretty much, and sooner or later, people, hell, for that matter, if you're a young man, invest in a lawnmower or push more even, and go start cutting grass and cleaning yards for a little chump change. None of these things require bureaucracy. None of these things require government, but they do all require buy-in. So people have to want to solve a problem. They have to recognize what the problem is, and they have to want to solve it. All right, and that stuff I provide. Look, local, that's what you can do. What does the state and federal government have a stake in it? What is their? Well, one, states can enforce law, yeah, without adding any political twist, without regard for their DEI programs, and without any social justice spin on it. Just enforce law. And if it's a bad law, guess what? Get rid of it. Yeah. We could probably stand to reduce our law in Georgia. We could probably stand to reduce the laws on our books by half. That's a big, bold guess. I'm guessing we could reduce that by half. Violent crime is always going to be against the law, folks. Murder, theft, assault, and battery. It's all always going to be against the law. But we can get rid of meaningless laws. Be tough on crime. Don't let repeat offenders or serious offenders walk. There needs to be consequences for things that we find to be unacceptable. And there needs to be a community, like statewide, sort of consensus on what is acceptable. Well, violence is not. Now, whether it's the 3 strikes mandates or minimum sentence, I'm not a big fan of minimum sentencing, but I think that's, should be per case. But don't let repeat offenders walk. Don't be soft on crime. Be hard on crime. Stop this no bail or reduced bail stuff. Now, everybody's like, accuses bail of being a scheme, just to get money. Well, it's a deterrent. If you're a repeat offender and if you start getting held accountable for the bail amount, well, you're just going to be sitting in jail. And that's the way it ought to be. Guess what? It ain't a scam if you don't pay the bail. If no money changes hands, then it ain't a scam at all, is it? And then at the state level, you can look at education. I think public schools are failed. But guess what? School of choice, at least, right? We don't want segregated schools necessarily, right? Some black people out there are like, yeah, I don't want my kids going to school with white kids, and vice versa. And that's some shit from way back. It's no good anymore. It's about education. Do you want your kid to be able to be articulate and to understand, have a vocabulary? When he reads a contract, does he need somebody to read it for him, or does he understand what's going on there? So I think school of choice is a thing. And I think the money should follow the student and not go to a district. And I think the funding should follow the student, but that funding should apply to private schools, charter schools, homeschool, the whole works. But education is one of the the key elements here in this whole poverty and crime situation, folks. Yeah. So education reform in some way to ensure that these kids in the ghettos are still getting legitimate, not just factory education, but I mean legitimate education. And then welfare reform, folks. I think welfare reform needs to come up. I think for the most part it needs to go away, except in most extreme cases. And yeah, you can like it or you can love me or hate me. I think there needs to be a work requirement with the ability to work. There needs to be a requirement. And all that can be done at state level. Federal level, what can be done at federal level? Well, very little, I guess. Keep your hands off my guns, but like, yeah, well, at the federal level, yeah, stop funding activist prosecutors and don't federalize local crime. Like, let the state deal. Let the state and the municipality deal with their situation in the way that they see fit. Because again, the only legitimate role of government, as per John Locke, as per Frederick Bastiat, is protecting individual rights and prosecuting guilty people who violate others' individual rights. Everything else is just tyranny in disguise. So yeah, that's it. It's a lot of education stuff there, federal wise, I think, or yeah, federal and state wise. Federally, I don't think there's much you can do for this poverty situation. Don't incentivize. So here's the thing. Here's what likes to happen. These liberal state programs get federal money to keep these programs going, but then they got to adhere to certain federal parameters. Cut the federal money out of it. So there's some solutions. I think the community-based solutions are better and more important than the larger solution, other than law enforcement itself. Or when I say law enforcement, I don't necessarily mean on the ground law enforcement. I mean the court system enforcement. Yeah, criminal justice reform needs to happen, but violent offenders need to be held accountable. That's all there is to it. Now, notice throughout these past little bit, I haven't said the catchphrase gun violence, because there's bigger issues than guns. It's just bigger issue. Gun violence, air quotes every time. I want you to understand. I'm doing finger quotes. It's a symptom. It's not the disease. It's a symptom. The disease is the degradation of a culture that excuses criminal behavior. A culture that weakens the family unit, and a culture that gives a free pass and gives a freebie and excuses to criminal behavior instead of accountability and demanding individual accountability. And it torments me to watch the local news every morning, and a little black kid, 7 or 8 years old, got shot in the leg, or a little black girl gets killed because of some rampant bullshit criminals out there doing whatever the hell they want. And that the bigger community don't have either the moral courage or what they consider to be the resources to address the problem, but more importantly, to name the problem. If you want change, some of you don't. If you want change, you got to demand personal accountability. You got to have a strong family unit. Even if you're a single mom, that don't mean you can't have a strong family unit. Arm yourself. If you're a law-abiding citizen, arm yourself and train. Yeah. And now, that's worst case scenario, but if you got to deal with a criminal, deal with it. But if you want change, personal accountability, yeah, strong family, defend yourself, and then hold these goddamn social justice prosecutors and defenders and judges accountable. And then make every effort to limit government to what its rightful job is. And that's to protect your rights, your individual rights. and to punish those that would violate those individual rights without prejudice. A white dude with a gun ain't no different than a black dude with a gun when he kicks your door open, or a knife, or a baseball bat, or his bare hands. Don't matter what tools they use. A criminal's a criminal. Don't matter what color they are. Don't matter what country they come from. If they're here to violate you or yours, race just became irrelevant. And unfortunately, what we saw in statistics is there's too much black on black crime. That's the majority of the crime, folks, out there in the world. So, addressing the problem, calling it what it is and who it is, and then demanding change. Anything less than that, it just sells out, well, the people I grew up with in the lower ends of Atlanta, metro Atlanta. And it sells out every law-abiding citizen and no matter what city it is. So be accountable and demand accountability from everybody else. That's what I got today, folks. Might have been a little not too light, but I see it every morning and I felt the need. All right. Thank you for listening to this. I welcome your debate. Please check out all the shooting stuff, OspreyShootingSolutions.com. We still got a lot going on up through June. Please check out twoteamguys.com. If you want to venture out into some proper leadership and team building through adventurous means, then that's where to do it. Please continue to listen to this podcast. I hope I don't lose any listeners based on this podcast. Find it on all the platforms and at thejuntopodcast.com. And of course, finally, please, if you have the means, please give a little bit to givesendgo.com/help-a-homie-fund. And that's our charitable efforts to try to help people who need it. It's small scale, but one day soon it will be growing. Other than that, folks, please reach out. I do want to hear your feedback. Take care of each other. Be accountable to yourself and to others, and hold others accountable. Take care of each other, folks. I love you guys.